I was told to hold on. I'm holding on. It'll be practice. He was making sure I could speak clearly. Loud is never an issue with me, that's for sure. That's me. Yeah, one of our people's going to dinner with us, and I'm taking an Uber. I don't do cold. I'm like, oh yeah, your nation's down in Arizona, California. You wouldn't do cold.
He said no.
Okay. For us, we're like, woohoo, this is a nice heat wave. Are we ready? All right. Well, we're glad you guys are here, and our two elders that wanted to be here are not able to, obviously, but we're thankful for technology to have them join us today. As we had conversations, we said, what kind of Indigenous people would we be if you didn't stay home to take care of your elders and not expose them to COVID? So we're excited that Jim and Lenore are here with us, and Lenore, we'll have you start us off.
Okay. Mitakuyapi, welcome my relatives. We're honored that you chose to spend some time with us today. I'm happy to be here too. Zoom is my friend, usually. I call you Mitakuyapi, my relatives, to reflect a Lakota philosophy of life that means we are all related. Mitakuye Oyansi. We're related to Creator, we're related to each other, and we're related to all parts of creation. My goal in life is to be a good relative. Let us borrow some words from our Lakota Wichashawaka, a holy man named Nicholas Black Elk, to pray over this gathering. Pray with me. Wakantamka Iotamashaka, Most Mighty Heavenly Father, you have been always, and before you nothing has been. There is nothing to pray to but you. The star nations all over the universe are yours, and yours are the grasses of the earth. Day in and day out, you are the life of things. You are older than all need, older than all pain and prayer. May I also ask the blessing of health and safety on the relatives in this gathering and on their loved ones too, wherever they are. O'Okiapi Niue, guide and help us, we pray. May these words and this time together honor you, Creator Jesus, and unite us in your spirit. Mitakuye Oyansi. Amen.
So we wish to observe the protocol of respect that we practice, and that it is practiced by Indigenous people around the world. On behalf, we want to recognize that we are guests on the ancestral lands of the original Anishinaabe, hosts including the Council of Three Fires, the Ojibwe, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi. And just across, I always want to do this because when I come to Chicago, I am on the ancestral lands of my people, the Ho-Chunk, on my grandmother's side. Today, Chicago has the 6th largest urban Native American population, a community that still cares for the land and waterways and still practices their Native traditions.
All right, we want to introduce ourselves so you know who is here. And so, Lenore, how about you go ahead and go first?
Okay. My name is Lenore Three Stars. I'm Oglala Lakota, which is one of the 7 bands of the Lakota that make up the Teton division of the Oceti Sakowin. The Oceti Sakowin is the 7 council fires, or as you may have learned it in school, the Great Sioux Nation. My dad was Oglala Lakota, born on the Pine Ridge Reservation, where I was born. My mom is Minikoju Lakota from the Cheyenne River tribe. Today, I live in Spokane, where my most important role is that of Unchi, grandmother to my 2 Takojas, my grandchildren. The ancestral lands of the Lakota include Pesapa, the Black Hills, where our creation story lives. Jim?
Aloha, my name is Jim Sakira. I'm native Hawaiian, Chinese, and Portuguese. My dad is from Lahaina, Maui. My mom is from Hilo, Hawaii. And I was born on the big island of Salem, Oregon. My parents moved there to go to college. I live in Vancouver, Washington, on the ancestral lands as well as ancestral waterways of the Chinook people, recognizing that I am a guest on their land. I've been married for 37 years. We have 2 adult children and 2 mo'opunas, that's grandchildren in Hawaiian. I pastor at Cascade Covenant Church in Vancouver, Washington. And in addition to my MDiv studies, I also studied at the North American Institute for Indigenous Theological Studies, just to help me in my decolonization, but also just to help as an Indigenous, as a Hawaiian, in my own spiritual journey. And so that's a little bit of my background. And again, mahalo, thank you for being here with us.
Hamataki ape, TJ Smith, Chipi, my Lakota. Hi, my name is TJ Smith. Hi, my relatives. My name is TJ Smith, and I'm Lakota. And you'll notice Lenore's introduction is way different than mine, and that's due to Doctrine of Discovery, because of my family getting literally picked up and put on a cattle car and transferred to the Lummi Nation in Washington, where my grandfather grew up at. I live on the land of the Dena'ina people in Anchorage, Alaska, and we're glad you're here.
Uvluloatak uvanga yungak. Good afternoon. My name is Yungak. In our tradition, when we're born, each child receives a name. Typically, we're named after someone who had recently passed away. I was named after my grandfather, Paul Ivanov, and so that's my Inupiaq name is Yungak. I'm Curtis Ivanov. I am from the village of Unalakleet. My great-great-grandfather came over from Siberia. He's Russian, Sergei Ivanov. That's where I get my Russian last name. My great-great-grandmother was from the area near Unalakleet. My mother is the daughter of a German farmer and a Norwegian mother from South Dakota. So I have quite a mix. But I see my heritage as Inupiaq, having been raised in Unalakleet. And so that's my cultural view. So I serve as a superintendent of the Alaska Conference. I was born and raised in Unalakleet, and I'm really glad that you're here with us today. And so, Jim.
Yeah, I would like to just share with you kind of the process and the history of the Doctrine of Discovery regarding the covenant. So, and again, these are through my eyes. First of all, I just want to say that there's always been Indigenous people in the covenant for a very long time. In fact, ever since the Native Alaskans have been involved with the covenant, that's how long we have had Indigenous representation here. But our denomination was made aware of the Doctrine of Discovery by Lenore Stars when she facilitated the first journey to Mosaic. And I was talking to Lenore, I think it was back in 2006. And so when she started sharing the story of the Native people in the Pacific Northwest, a very important part of the story that she shared was also about the Doctrine of Discovery, at which time it was new to me. And so over each year, every time we did the journey to Mosaic, Lenore shared about the Doctrine of Discovery. And then somewhere between, I think around 2017, I thought it was in Louisville, but somebody said it was at Kansas City they saw us. But Lenore, Curtis, and I were asked to do a workshop on the Doctrine of Discovery. It would be the first workshop. But needless to say, they did it on a Wednesday evening. And as you know, everybody there on like tonight's party night. And so, we're thinking, great, we're going to get to share our story when everybody's out going to movies and doing all those kinds of things. Not only that, as we were walking through to see where our workshop was going to be, it took us to like one of the deepest, darkest places on the facility. I mean, it was like in the basement, in the corner. I mean, two Indigenous people got lost trying to find where we were going to have our workshop. We finally made it down there. And then we weren't anticipating very many people, and we just started putting chairs away. Lenore and I started folding up chairs. And I think Lenore, we had maybe 25 chairs we left out, and that was kind of being hopeful. As Lenore, Curtis, and I were getting ready, getting prepared, people started showing up. And that evening, over 200 people showed up to hear about the Doctrine of Discovery. And so it's kind of been ever since then, and a lot of leaders came up and just said, hey, we appreciate the story. We didn't know about it. You need to keep sharing that and let people know about it. And so we did, and we have. The Christian Action Commission invited Lenore, Randy Woodley, and Curtis in helping draft the resolution on the Doctrine of Discovery initially. When Cecilia was here. And then, as always, Lenore snuck me in through the back door, so I was also able to be part of the pulling it together. And then there was a target date that was set to present the resolution, the repudiation of the Doctrine of Discovery at an annual meeting. but because there were other, and I'm putting up like my fingers in quotation mark, there were other priorities, it was dropped. And so it just kind of, died there. When Paul Robinson took the helm of Love, Mercy, Do Justice, he desired to move the resolution forward and present it at the annual meeting. And like he described last night, if you heard his message, he brought together gifted and talented band of people, just a good group of people, not only those that were presently part of that Christian Action Commission, but also involving the Mosaic. And also Paul alluded to the fact that there was a concern whether this was going to pass or not. And when we heard about that, we had kind of an Indigenous meeting to see if we wanted to move forward with this, or whether, it was just maybe let's just wait till next year. But we felt that we needed to move forward. There was momentum. We were able to share our stories. We had opportunities through Covenant Companion and various venues to be able to share the story. So we believe that the momentum was there in getting the story out for Indigenous people. That's the most important part. And we knew that if it did not pass, when we look behind us, when we look to those following us, we were encouraged by the leaders, the young Indigenous leaders that we believe that would have been able to forward that eventually. And so Lenora was going to be the representative at the annual meeting, but because of COVID and her mother and family members, she stepped down, she stepped aside. And then we had TJ. TJ was a representative, presented, did a wonderful job. We were very, very proud of him. And then last year at the 2021 annual meeting, we passed the repudiation of the Doctrine of Discovery. Although we weren't there, Lenore and I were texting back and forth. And when it passed, literally just broke down in tears. My wife calls it ugly crying. When we gathered ourselves, we texted TJ and we said, we're just really, really proud of the job that you did. So thank you. So that's a little bit of a thumb sketch of the journey that we've been on. Although many of you just heard about the Doctrine of Discovery within the last couple of years, it has been a long, long journey that we've been on together. So again, thank you for being here.
Yeah, I'd like to give a shout out to Kathy Norman Peterson, who kept our story alive by putting us in the companion.
Yeah, there's, and also I just want to add, there was a time where I said that, they dropped it. And Kathy was just an advocate for just making sure our story stayed alive. The other piece too, I really appreciate about, Kathy, it wasn't just the story, but she really felt the pain and the injustice of that. And so we just want to thank her, and I was telling her, we missed her during the first meeting. I wish we could have done the shout out. And she says, I'm not there to get the shout out, but we just want people to know it's those that join in the journey that help us to get the story out. And so, we know it's not about Kathy, but it's her heart that helped us in this journey. So,
Jim, do you want to ask the questions?
Oh, what?
Do you want to ask the questions?
Yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to have you break out into groups, maybe 2 or 3. And we have a couple questions that we'd like you to talk about. And then we're also going to give you an opportunity to share. So here are the 2 questions. One is, how or when did you learn about the Doctrine of Discovery? Maybe, last workshop, we heard that people, someone learned about it in school. Although it was very limited, they learned about it from schools. Most people learned about it during the covenant's repudiation. So how or when did you learn about the Doctrine of Discovery? And then the second question is, how did your church respond to hearing about the resolution to repudiate the Doctrine of Discovery? And so we want to hear, please be honest with us. I mean, we know that there were some churches that were totally against it, but we want to hear honestly how your church responded to the repudiation of the doctrine. We just feel like it's, we just want to learn. And I think it just helps equip us in order to help teach others. And so we're going to break you up into groups, take maybe between around 5 or 7 minutes. And then TJ will call us back and then give you an opportunity to share your heart and some of the things that you've been thinking through. So go ahead, find somebody maybe that you don't know, or even maybe somebody you're comfortable sharing with for safety reasons. And we'll be back to you in 5 to 7 minutes. Hey, Curtis? Curtis? Are we, no video, just audio? No video, correct? Just audio? No, are we on video? Oh,
Like, this is written down, this is
Yes.
stated.
we didn't know.
Yes.
It wasn't just
I
like a
We can
generalized
chat.
idea. Okay.
We
So
can
it
use the
started in
chat function.
1453. He's much more knowledgeable than I am. It started in 1453 with papal bulls, and the final papal was in 1493.
Okay.
Hey, when,
What
if
happened
Kathy
right the year
Peterson pokes her head in, would you let us know?
Exactly. And so that was the finalization of,
Okay.
we had this, now we're going to impose this.
So the church saying, because we're bringing the gospel, we can do whatever we
Because
want.
we have this goal that we want. See, now even that phrase, "Oh, please hear my heart."
Well, no,
Right?
but that's what they would have said.
Hi,
That's what they
Celeste.
would have
Hey,
said.
Celeste,
They
how
would
are
have
you?
said,
Yes.
we need to do this
You too.
because we need to save the heathens.
Yeah, yeah. And I know, like, obviously, that's not your heart if that's how you're going to do it.
Yeah, so
Yeah. Sure.
Being up close and personal on Zoom, huh?
Yeah.
You want me to put on? Should we put our masks on for the video? Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thank you. Good seeing you. Yeah. Oh yeah, it's going to be in Florida next year. Let's have a workshop. Put us down. Pay for our trip.
I'm not going
I
to
mean,
Florida.
pray for the opportunity that we may serve the Lord.
Or you want to go to Mar-a-Lago?
Yeah. Yeah. Woo-hoo.
I'm not going to Florida.
No.
What's the ADP? Oh. Wow.
Yeah. We're looking at you. Yeah. Go ahead.
Wow. Yeah, how come you can't hear Jim? I can't hear Jim either. Mhm. Yeah, we lost Jim. I can see you, but not hear you. No, not yet. Not yet, not yet.
Better?
Can you hear my sound?
I can. That work?
There.
Oh, good, good.
Would you
I thought maybe the
turn
Holy
on
Spirit was trying to
button?
mute. Yeah. I forgot to replace the batteries. Yeah, yeah. You know, Celeste, somebody had contacted me and I told them I'd like to get together in Midwinter, but you know, I did because they wanted some, you know, to find out, you know, some things and stuff. You know, like I don't know if you're there, but you know, I offered up that Lenore and I would be willing to, you know, sit in and kind of do what we did before to get things ready. So. I got her okay after. She said it was okay. So that's why I gave her cell phone number.
It's like,
That's why
like one of
I've
those,
been giving her cell phone
one of
numbers to
those
everybody.
treaties.
That's right. I speak on both of Lenore and me, and I speak on behalf of all Indigenous people all over the world. Yes, it is okay. Great. Yeah.
You know what, we haven't even talked about lament. I mean, we're jumping right to action without going through lament and truth telling. So
You know what, do you want to do it, Lenore, or you want me to do it, to shout
go
out?
ahead. Do
Okay.
it.
How about just when you're just about to get people ready and started for the questions? Just before people share, in case she has to leave.
Oh, okay.
30 seconds.
I know some people are just
Okay.
Okay. And totally do. But I also think that like
You hear me whisper?
Yes.
Oh my.
So one of the things that I get to do, because our elders asked us to do it, and in our culture we respect our elders, usually. Lenore's laughing, it's like, wait a minute, usually, is Kathy Norman Peterson. I know you're going to shoot me later. That is okay, please stand up. Give her a hand, please. And we intentionally want to honor because, as Jim said last session, she continued, and Jim will tell this a little bit later on, but continued to share our story. And even in the writing of the Repudiation of Doctrine of Discovery, she helped make it, she cleaned it up for us. And so we want to honor you and say thank you very much. They didn't know you were on before, so that's why we didn't embarrass you earlier, but we want to embarrass you now for that. You'll see we have really bad senses of humor. We think it's funny, so it's okay. Yeah, thank you for that laugh, Lenore. Where are we at? Group sharing, thank you. Anybody, the first question again, how did you learn of Doctrine of Discovery? Or did you learn of Doctrine of Discovery? Anyone want to share about that? I will bring the mic to you and I will be masked for you.
Don't make Lenore single you out.
I'll go
just
first.
point
I'll
to
just
you.
say that my family and I are new to the church that we're at, and so new to the ECC as well. So we were not aware of like any of these long-standing conversations. As far as the Doctrine of Discovery in particular, I did not know about like the specifics of it. I knew kind of the general ideas of manifest destiny and that the church had perverted things in order to take land. I've known that for a long time, but I'm only still just learning about kind of the specifics of that.
Anyone else? And I want to make sure our Kapuna understands, you were right, it was Louisville. Because it was 5 minutes in the caverns trying to figure out where the heck we were at.
That's right.
Anyone else on that? Yes. And again, there's no wrong answers. This is your story.
My name's Keisha Strode, and I'm in the Northwest Conference, and I'm on the ministerial board, and it was actually in conversations there that I first learned about it, which was shocking that I was like, how do I not know this stuff? And I've also been part of the anti-racism discipleship cohorts, and so I've had a chance through those to really dig in and learn, and have really had my knowledge expanded somewhat. Still learning.
We got a new mic. This one's about dead. We're standing by with new mics, so you got to speak really loud so they can hear. Do you need this? Anyone else?
Oh, thank you. Because I can't hear it anyway.
And yeah, it was that Wednesday night and a very difficult place to find. And I remember how shocked you all, the three of
It was the three of them.
those three, you weren't.
Oh, good. Thank you. Yeah, really well.
Yes, thank you. Okay,
Okay.
thanks for warning us.
Jim,
Yeah,
is the native story part of the ADP? Is that what it's called?
yeah, it is.
We're back, and it's not Memorex. Y'all are too young, never mind. It was just a bad joke. Okay, I got the no-nos. It was a bad joke. So again, where did you see, how did your church receive it, or how did they did
Okay,
they
I can hear him
participate?
too.
Or did they participate? Technology is great. Anyone? Sure. I'll let you go.
Okay. So again, we're fairly new to our church, but I did hear it talked about a little bit at our church. I remember our pastor, I think, shared some things on like our church Facebook group about it. And then when it did pass, I believe he read it in the service and just talked about how it was an important thing. And honestly, even though we didn't know all of that was in the pipeline, one of the reasons we came to our church is we recognized that they valued diversity. And I think we had kind of, we were Facebook looking up and had seen like that, okay, Lenore's part of it. We didn't even know Lenore, but we knew she was Indigenous and we're looking for that. So it was just confirmation that our church is on board with all of that. So that was encouraging to us as new people.
You. Hi, Nate Hickox, Faith Covenant, Wheaton, Illinois. I would say in general, most of our church was unaware of what was going on, both before and after the fact. Part of that is just we need to do a better job of communicating covenant things, so it was nothing to do with this in particular. Just plus we have a lot of people who have come to us from outside the covenant, so they don't feel so. There's a strong core that keeps tabs on covenant things, and but also a large group that really is just unaware and unconnected. But I did receive a few particularly strong toxic emails about it that I was CC'd on, and and then one of the key leaders in my church was a part of that, and he's just like, where does this stop? Or are we going to repudiate the church's complicity in Nazi Germany, and are we going to repudiate the Puritans and their and so. It was hard to deal with those things, and there were some other comments along similar lines that I was sent, and those don't represent me at all or our church at all. But those were difficult to deal with, and that definitely happened. So.
Anyone else?
Those things were all because of the Doctrine of Discovery.
Yeah. Anyone else? Comments, thoughts on that? Perspective? Yes, ma'am.
I just remember that the delegates that our church sent, when they sent virtually, when they reported on the vote, I don't know that it made much of an impact on the congregation. I think they just kind of heard it, but I could tell that the delegate understood why and valued it. And I think she had learned in that, and she communicated that. It wasn't just this action was taken, but clearly this was a bad thing, and it was good that we made this decision. And I remember her we language too, like we made this decision. So I could tell that she had a sense of ownership in that.
Anyone else? We don't want to drag it up, but we don't want to cut anyone off either.
My name is Jenny Hoskins, and we've been serving with Serve Globally in Ecuador for a number of years. And it's been really fascinating and really encouraging to learn from the Ecuadorian Covenant Church and their involvement with Indigenous communities within Ecuador, and just how different it looks from our experience here in the U.S. And the Ecuadorian Covenant Church was really instrumental in helping the Indigenous communities in Ecuador fight for land rights. And so I think for them, there's just a lot of questions of why is this even an issue? And we have a lot to learn from our brother and sister churches around the world.
And at the same time, I'll say they have the same issues as we do here. In some realms they're ahead of us, in some realms maybe not. Thank you. Anyone else? Who's up next?
Thank you.
All right, we'll have Lenore speak about kind of framing this work and this ongoing work.
Yeah. Thank you for all speaking out. And what strikes me is that the Puritans and Nazi ethnic cleansing is all attributable to the Doctrine of Discovery. So I think we kind of covered the whole thing. So to frame post-repudiation repair and healing work, here are some examples of how the Doctrine of Discovery continues to perpetuate its deadly legacy in the United States. One example is reservations and poverty. There are 574 federally recognized tribes in the United States, with a couple of hundred more waiting for recognition, and 315 Indian reservations in this country. American treaties offered Indians bleak promises of a different place to live and government handouts for food. In exchange, they took millions of acres of land and natural resources. Hundreds of treaties were made, written in English for Indigenous peoples who didn't speak English and didn't understand the Western legal concepts of private property. Treaties were pressed under life and death circumstances, as sovereign ways of tribal subsistence and society had been destroyed. Not one treaty was fully honored by the United States. So if you ever hear that Indians get free services from the government, please understand that these are not free, they are prepaid. The Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868 promised the Oceti-Sakowin exclusive use of Hesapa, our sacred land. But when gold was discovered in the Black Hills, the land was taken back. In 1980, SCOTUS decided that the government took the land without just compensation and awarded the Oceti-Sakowin $14 million to pay for the land. To date, despite deep pockets of poverty, the Oceti-Sakowin has not accepted the money, which is up to $1.3 billion now with interest, because of a worldview that we can't own or sell our relative, Unchimaka, Grandmother Earth. SCOTUS had legally reduced natives to dependent wards of the government, and the government assumed unilaterally a plenary power or unlimited power over Indigenous people, including ownership of reservation lands and resources. This paternalistic pretext for greed is called a trust relationship, and it's legal because of the doctrine. You can't get a bank loan, for instance, using the reservation land that you live on as collateral because the government owns it for you. So one question is, can we imagine ways to contextually approach repair for reservations that are trying to create economic improvement. Individually, do you support Native-owned businesses? Another example is Indian boarding schools. These schools were a key strategy in forced assimilation in the United States and in Canada. Kill the Indian to save the man and steal their future by taking their children. The military created these boarding schools patterned after POW camps in the Civil War. They were actually labor camps, not schools. Children died from starvation, abuse of every imaginable kind, disease, hard labor, and exposure from trying to run away. The administration of these boarding schools were transferred over to church denominations. Christian people who knew correct beliefs, like Imago Dei, chose not to apply it to Native children. The orthodoxy that we are all made in the image of God with equal value was not their orthopraxy. They were able to compartmentalize their theology in favor of a racialized ideology of the doctrine of discovery. Some settlers said they wanted to evangelize natives, but colonizing for Jesus has always been about the land, and it still is. In the United States, between 1869 and 1960, there were 367 boarding schools in 29 states. Overall, it is estimated that over 150,000 Native children went to boarding schools. In the years ahead, we're going to hear much more history about the boarding schools as searches begin for the remains of children who died there. Hidden, undocumented deaths estimated up to 40,000 children. Canada has already begun their search and they've passed the 7,000 mark. So will the church step forward in favor of hearing a painful truth? The cruel experiment in assimilation created intergenerational trauma that we are still trying to heal from. The boarding schools destroyed the traditional pattern of rearing children, which is for them to learn language, values, and skills from the right relatives at the right times. Grandparents, aunties, and uncles all had a role in raising children. That pattern was destroyed in boarding schools, and the surviving children were raised in horrific trauma. So when they became parents, that's all they had to pass on. Speaking our native language is critical to our well-being and healing. Now, I know in Spokane, there's a Salish language school that could use its support as it reclaims cultural language. Maybe there's one where you are. Another example is trauma and health disparities. The trauma didn't end when boarding schools closed, or most of them. Descendants carry a blood memory, now referred to as epigenetics. Scientific studies show that the inherited DNA and the epigenetic instructions that ride the DNA like a ghost gene convey transgenerational trauma called historic trauma response, or HTR. This provides a biological explanation for inherited effects of colonial trauma caused by the ideology of the doctrine of discovery. Many present-day health disparities can be traced back to a colonial deficit. HTR can be seen in descendants of African slaves, Japanese internees, and Holocaust victims. Dr. Maria Braveheart, who's Hunkpapa Lakota, explains that HTR is cumulative pain in the past, but continuing as unresolved grief. This can result in many health problems, including heart disease, alcoholism, diabetes, and suicidal ideation in the subsequent generations. So the need for trauma-informed healthcare is essential. What would advocacy and opportunity in healthcare systems look like in a repair paradigm? Natives all know in this country that Native Indian Health Service is severely underfunded and understaffed, and that was only exacerbated by the pandemic. Our hope is in knowing that we also carry the fortitude of our ancestors. As we reclaim our cultures, we reclaim our health. Another example is missing and murdered Indigenous women, a horrible phenomenon. From an Indigenous perspective, there is a strong correlation between how the land is treated and how women are treated. Women are traditionally honored as life givers and culture carriers. The ideology of the Doctrine of Discovery continues to devastate the land as women are raped. On some reservations, Indigenous women are murdered up to 10 times the national rate. 1 in 3 Native women have experienced rape and sexual violence. Trafficking and violence are largely attributable to man camps, which is the transient workforce necessary to extraction industries. Law enforcement has been inadequate to address the missing and murdered Indigenous women due to racial stereotypes. Oh, she's probably out drinking. And the convoluted jurisdictions between federal, state, and local authorities. There's no standard way of reporting and documenting these missing women. Tribal cops have the least authority and resources to find their own people, so the families do it. Legal allies and legislative expertise are crucial in this area. Another example is the church role. The church has had a substantial role in colonizing and in enacting a narrative of white supremacy on Indigenous peoples. Many denominations supported or administered Indian boarding schools and benefited from land opportunities. Many denominations still teach a theology of assimilation rather than a theology of wholeness. For many years, I accommodated myself and my son to a white church culture before Jesus turned me to decolonization and healing. In the same way, the church should also have a substantial role in making it right. To begin with, the church can choose to be an ally, make space for lament, make space for truth-telling, and what happened to the people of Turtle Island. Healing first needs truth-telling and honest listening. Thanks.
I'm going to share some reflections, followed by Jim and TJ. Yep. And so the reflection I'm going to share focus on history in Alaska. And as I think about this whole, the whole big picture here, is about land and water and the loss of land and water, the taking of land and water. Alaska is a little unique in that in 1971 was the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, which that's a whole other story. But in that act, we don't have reservations, but that set up ownership of land, that the Alaska Natives do own the land differently than how Lenore mentioned. Reservations is held in trust by the U.S. We own land, but what happened was we were given 12% of all the lands in Alaska. That means there was 88% that the U.S. government, the state of Alaska, then became owners of. So, that's quite a percentage. So I want to say it's really significant for us in doing history to do it well, to consider the context of the past and the situations, and not overlay our concerns, our thoughts and everything onto 1887 or in the past. And sometimes that happens. I want to say this about Alaska to consider the work of our covenant church. It happened in concurrence with many other Protestant denominations in the 1880s. There was the advent of Protestant mission work in Alaska. Prior to that, in the 18th century, I think this is also significant too. When I consider mission work and the work of the church in Alaska, the sharing of the gospel, before missionaries ever showed up, there was always other external contact. In the 1700s, fur seekers from Russia came and literally raped the populations of sea otters and some of our women, Thlinkit and Sukhbak and Unangan women. But that was in the 1700s. Missionaries came after that. Russian Orthodox missionaries came in the 1800s, right before Alaska was purchased from Russia for $7.2 million, and we weren't consulted. You know, it was just a deal between the U.S. government and the Russian government. The native peoples there didn't have any say in the matter, but when it was purchased. At that time, there was whalers from all over the world, England, Scandinavia, Portugal, and they decimated the marine mammals, whales, walrus, seals, bearded seals, but especially whales and walrus, because at that time, whale oil was a commodity, you know. When we were purchased, then Alaska was known as Seward's Folly or Seward's Icebox. There was no interest, there was no desire of the U.S. peoples to, you know, stake claims, and you know, we were just kind of, for a decade, didn't even hardly exist except for a military outpost or two. Until then, a Presbyterian missionary came to Alaska and saw starvation, the effects of alcoholism and abuses of women. It was not a good scene, and that's when a Swedish explorer also came and saw the same thing. There was starvation because of the decimation of all of these marine mammals. We eat whales, and it is good, man. But then it was a tough history. So it was in that time then that Swedish missionaries came because they heard about this struggle. And having hearts like we have, our heritage is to respond to hurt with compassion and mercy and justice. And so Swedish missionaries came and brought the gospel of Jesus. As I have served in this role, and I'm from Unalakleet, but I'm a student of history, I have been intentionally asking elders about their stories of the work of the church, their experiences of our boarding school. I went to our boarding school that we began in 1954 in a completely different era of the Kill the Indian, Save the Man residential model that began in 1879. And as Lenore talked about, you know, many other schools were replicated that model. But in 1954, totally different time, and we had a boarding school. I was the youngest student in there, and so I experienced it. And man, our alumni would say that they were very blessed. Our principal was Mr. White, of all names, Mr. White. My cousin said next to his father, the most influential man in his life was Mr. White. He said, we came because I saw an opportunity to share about Jesus and to provide education. He said that I talked to him years later after the school closed in 1985. What they saw was that Western society was here to stay, and that it was like a steamroller, which is very true. And he said instead of the people being steamrolled, he said we need to equip these students and empower them to be able to be at the controls, not to steamroll others, but to be able to navigate this Western society. And I'll tell you, it's a tricky thing living in two worlds. That's how I've grown up, living in two worlds. The covenant in relation to when we think of the land, as I've listened to elders and heard stories about Covenant High School, but then the work of the gospel, I will tell you that one of the primary characteristics of it is gratitude. Gratitude for the gospel of Jesus. There's a book called Jesus and the Eskimo, written by one of our elders named Fred Savak, who's now with the Lord. He walked on over a decade ago, but I'm so thankful that his words, his story, and his retelling of the story of the gospel work in Alaska was preserved. And I think it's really important as we engage in the work of justice, but for us to really hear the voices of those who experienced and walked in those days. I have a picture hanging in my office from 1947, annual meeting in Alaska, the 60th anniversary. In the pictures, T.W. Anderson, president of the Covenant, Maynard Lomberg, founder of Covenant High School, Roald Amundsen, pastor, founder of the first mission aviation ministry in Alaska, Emery Lindgren, who was a longtime pastor in Alaska, Don Bruckner, who's came to Alaska and served as pastor and church planter. In the front row is Jacob Kinnick, who started the church in Macoriac, Wilson Ganungnan, who started the church in Mountain Village in 1919, Reuben Penupchuk, my great-great-grandfather, who was a reindeer herder and lay pastor, and Jacob Awanona, another native man who was a pastor. These were mission friends. I see a son of one of my predecessors in the room here, and he was a man who shepherded our churches for a time and encouraged me. But it's a picture of mission friendship. Now, the history of assimilation is very real, and I have been trying to understand. People ask me, how are we complicit? Almost as if they just salivate, like, how are we complicit? Because, man, we had to have been complicit, and anger. Well, yeah, and I've been trying to understand that. But the overarching spirit is gratitude. And I led a workshop at our 2017 annual meeting in Alaska following an apology that the Presbyterian Church made in 2016 to Native Alaskans, Alaska Natives and Native Americans and Pacific Islanders. And one of the statements in that apology was that we made this mistake, that an essential part of the gospel was that you become like us. I think that's a really powerful statement. But I'll never forget. So I brought that, I was like, so what about for our work? And I'll never forget this native from one of our villages. What do we have to apologize for, But the assimilation was real. And so I think we do need to be students to know what kind of work of the reconciliation of the gospel of Jesus needs to touch our history. But I think it's important to really be good students, because the history in Alaska, there's a different aspect to it, because we don't have reservation. We didn't have a reservation system in Alaska, but we had boarding schools. There's painful stories. But man, our people are really grateful for the bringing of the gospel of Jesus. So those are a few perspectives.
And my perspective is, I love when the four of us tell stories, because we all come from different journeys and perspectives, right? You're good, brother, no worries. We appreciate you being here for when you were here. And so I want to share that this is not past, this is also current. It still affects us as we are today. As Lenore talked about the boarding schools and the over 7,500 kids and empty graves, that was in 130 boarding schools in Canada. She said we have over 360 here in the U.S. Are we getting ready for that? I think of the governor of Nevada said this. He said, there's a boarding school near Carson City where the governor's mansion is, and he said, how would you feel if the government showed up to your door one day, took your child, and you never knew what happened? That's what happened to us. As Curtis shared, not all of us, thankfully. We also have horror stories in Alaska of a boarding school in Wrangell that did happen. I have a friend that made it out of there alive. We think about how this is still active and alive. My uncle, before he married my aunt, my grandmother said, and she is Winnebago and Cherokee, or Ho-Chunk and Cherokee, sat down with my aunt before they were married and said, you don't want to marry him. You know he's an Indian, right? How do you say that about your own kid? Except for the shame and the guilt that has been piled on, and don't worry about that. I think about when we were in a sister church and we were meeting at night, a woman walks into our church, a Native Alaskan. So we greet her and say, how you doing? Here's a coffee, come and sit down and enjoy us. And I'm getting up there and I'm just getting ready to start the sermon, and she goes, Pastor. Yes, ma'am. Are you the ones that effing stole our gold? Thankfully, I'd just taken covenant history. I knew the answer. Yes, ma'am, we are. Double barrels. F-U. as she walks out, and then my church goes, what happened? To unpack that. Lenore was talking about HTR. If you don't think that's real, ask my wife. She's a teacher. I work from home. She came home one day and said, "Are you okay?" I said, "No, I can't breathe. I have to leave. I can't breathe." I got in my truck and went about a half hour south, and 20 minutes out of town, I could finally breathe again. And I was reading Unsettling Truths and Sung Cha and Mark Charles, and they were writing about that. That was a God-ordained reading, because I understood what was happening to me. It was my grandfather being put in on a cattle car because of my great-grandfather's drinking because he lost his identity, so he was, quote-unquote, in Western culture, a hellion on a reservation. So the government picked up my grandfather, his siblings, and my great-grandparents, put them on a cattle car in the winter, and shipped them to the Lummi Nation. It still happens. I think about pre-passing COVID, or before COVID came, that we knew there was a church plant on Turtle Mountain Reservation, and I was walking, as I do here, on the loop thing, because it's a great track to walk, and all that good stuff, and the Creator literally that morning says, "You need to get Curtis, and you and him need to go pray in your languages for them as they sign their letter of intent to plant a church on Turtle Mountain." They were going home to her nation, her people, her reservation. 10-cent treaty is what her people called it, or still call it today. And I remember us praying in our languages, and I remember her turning around and going with tears in her eyes, "We're welcome here. Our languages, our culture, our peoples, we are welcome here. Because I don't know your language, but I have Lakota friends." In our worship service. I can't remember, I think it was last night, the drummer, I wanted to get up, I told the other group, I wanted to get up and dance in a powwow, because the rhythm and the beat was a powwow beat for me. Richard Twist says, every step in a powwow is a prayer. Life. And lastly, I want to think about how, because of us passing as a denomination the repudiation of the Doctrine of Discovery, I now have a new friend, and I'm going to call him Fred, because every guy in my story is Fred, till I meet a guy named Fred, and then you won't know any different anyway. And he called me right after the repudiation passed. Angry. He's First Nations. Angry. Irritated. I gotta go because I'm too pissed off, TJ. I'm good with that. Check back in with me later. 2 weeks ago, almost 2 weeks ago now, we spent 3 hours on the phone. Talking about First Nations things, talking about decolonization, how do you let go but not forget? How do you forgive and heal? And I told him, I said, look where you were 6 months ago and look where you are now. And now we're starting to dream about how to serve our peoples with the resources and the ability that his family, specifically his grandfather as a First Nations person, had done a ministry before, and he wants to revive that, to honor his grandfather, but also to serve our people. Jim?
So for the Hawaiian Journey, it's an interesting journey because the Doctrine of Discovery is what motivated the missionaries to come. It was to bring the gospel to the uncivilized. And so when they arrived, they saw us as dirty, uncivilized. I mean, there was writings that, considered us and called us by those names. Ironically, most of our people accepted the gospel. And I don't want to say everybody was converted, but a lot of the elites, a lot of the royalty accepted the gospel. And it's interesting because what the gospel presented was what it was the values that my people had learned within our culture, within the world that we live in. And a lot of people think that it was the missionaries that brought us the gospel, brought us the word of God. But for Indigenous people, you know, we believe that Creator spoke to us. We believe the Creator showed up long before the missionaries did. And so the Creator taught us through creation, and throughout the Psalms, we see that. And so when the missionaries showed up, our people, when they heard the stories, they said, of course, you know, we knew that, but now there was something that was, you know, grounded or maybe spoken to them. And that was that connection. And one kapuna says, you know, when the missionaries came, we were really excited, but we didn't see Jesus. we didn't see Jesus. They talked about Jesus, but we didn't see Jesus in them. And so, you know, for the most part, Hawaiians and Hawaiians actually, they had believed in one uncreated creator. There was one creator. And so we were on our way to understanding the gospel. And so we were converted. Our values were biblical values, but they're also Indigenous values. And we became, you know, the royalty became, you know, followers of Jesus. Eventually our nation would grow and become its own, kind of the own sovereign place, right? I mean, Russia, Japan, Italy, France, Sweden recognized Hawaii as a sovereign kingdom. And that we had a Queen Liliuokalani, who loved Jesus. But the DNA of Doctrine of Discovery was so baked into people's lives, they did not see us as people being created in God's image. They saw us as savages. They saw us as wasting the land, not knowing how to do things. You know, in fact, the Hawaiians, we landed on the Hawaiian Islands, the Sandwich Islands, 400 AD. So we were there for 1,300 years before the missionary showed up. Ironically, what would happen with the Hawaiians is that even though we were followers of Jesus, Doctrine of Discovery says, you know, if you come to a kingdom and it says that they're Christian, then, you know, they're okay. But that wasn't good enough for the Doctrine of Discovery, or that wasn't good enough for the US. And so basically the Hawaiian Islands were overthrown. Our queen was overthrown. And our queen refused. You know, there's some Hawaiians that wanted to revolt. They wanted to fight, but our queen says, no, that's not the way of Jesus. Our queen for the Hawaiian people is very representative of the type of person Martin Luther King is to the African-American culture. Queen Liliuokalani decided to take the way of Jesus. And so it's interesting because really what the Doctrine of Discovery has done is it's been baked into everybody's DNA and the stripping away of people's dignity. And I think that, you know, a lot of people, we're all indigenous. We're all indigenous. And I think the colonizing mentality, the Doctrine of Discovery, has stripped us of the dignity of the people that we used to be, the indigeneity, if you will. And a lot of people, and I'm going to share about that. I don't want to go into too much detail. I'll share a little bit about this tomorrow, but part of the colonization, I think, is when people, especially white folk, they say, I don't have a story, I'm just white. Everybody is indigenous and everybody has a story. And so when it comes to the Doctrine of Discovery, it affects all of us. And the insidious part of the Doctrine of Discovery is that it's baked into our DNA, but it's passed along where the oppressed become the oppressor. And so that's kind of my quick reflection on the Doctrine of Discovery. And like I said, tomorrow you'll hear more of my reflection. I have the opportunity to share in tomorrow's morning session. It'll be, I recorded it Saturday, so hopefully that'll give you a little bit of insight into my reflection. I know we want to make sure that we have time for question and answers. But one of the reasons I know that many people are here, or one of the questions that we hear regarding, now that we've repudiated the Doctrine of Discovery, what's next? What can we do next? And so we're each going to take a minute to just share what are some of the next steps. And I want to be careful because Western colonial culture looks for that. What's that one thing? You know, what's that answer? Just tell me what I need to do. And really, it's part of a journey. And so what we share is part of the journey. Don't take this back and think this is 1, 2, 3 steps. This is what's next, but it's part of the journey. But hopefully this will help inform you of maybe the next steps. The one thing I want to share is to learn about the indigenous people in your area, in your region. And you need to understand this. When somebody's called Native American, you're talking about the broader group, but each group, each tribe within those groups are totally different people. It's really interesting because in the Hawaiian Islands, everybody just thinks, oh, everybody's Hawaiian, but there is a difference among the various people on the islands. So I know my family on the Big Island of Hawaii aren't going to appreciate this, but in a way, they're a little bit, I kind of look at them like my hillbilly cousins. They're a little bit more to the land and just a little rough around the edges sometimes. And so you need to understand that just because we say Native Americans, they're specific people to a specific place. Like I mentioned earlier, we have the Chinook people. Across the river, we have the Kalapuya people. And as you understand each tribe, there are different things about them. There's different ceremonies and customs and things like that. But I just want to encourage you to discover what are those, who are the people in your region, who are your host people. Learn about them, read about them. If you're willing to take the next step, I would say visit the Native Cultural Center that might be in your area. And even if you venture more, I would say even go to a powwow. You will be welcomed. Lenore took our journey to Mosaic. As I said, we did that. We've done that for years and years and years. And when we go to the powwows, in fact, the very first time we went to a powwow, unannounced, Lenore went up, let them know who we were, what we were doing, and we were like the most honored guest. In fact, we were part of what's called the Grand Entry. And I asked Lenore, is this big? She goes, this is very, very big. And so Native people are very, very hospitable. You know what? If there's a luau going on in your neighborhood, go to the luau. Go to the luau. Go enjoy some Hawaiian culture as well. But I would encourage you, get to know the people in your area, build relationships. Casinos don't count. So just because you go to a casino, don't think that that's you're getting to know the people. So, Lenore.
Yeah. What we did at that powwow is we made a donation. There's like a charter bus of 40 people, so we were noticeable. But we made a donation to the powwow committee. So if you go to a powwow as a group, that would be a good thing to do. And then they asked us, "So who are you?" And we got to share. The question, "What can we do?" is the usual response of the Western world. It has a take charge, pull yourself up, fix it attitude, but repair to heal is not a fix it issue. It's deeper than that. One thing I know we can do is choose how we treat Unchimaka, Grandmother Earth, and each other, because we can choose a relational worldview. You may have heard of the land back movement. It's a meta-narrative of reclaiming ourselves, the cultural relationships that we lost when we were removed from our ancestral homelands. That is a deep spiritual connection to land, and that was devastated. It relates, land back also relates to language, food sovereignty, treaty rights, and cooperative management of and access to public lands. Often those are places like the Black Hills where we gather medicine and do ceremony. Land back is not targeting your private property, but it has already inspired some to voluntarily return land to tribes. So allies are welcome in land back. But when the time comes for considering how to repair and heal the harm, I hope it's contextual, led by the Indigenous voices in those areas. For instance, where I live now, the Spokane tribe has been working to get uranium poisoning cleaned off of their reservation for so long. Occasionally, they will ask the public to voice their support for this cleanup and to speak out against weakening EPA standards. So find out what it is and be there.
Just so many things, all good ideas, and I just maybe add, thinking a big picture. I'm reminded of how Desmond Tutu just passed away, and something that he championed, that he led in his country, was Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which Canada modeled to do have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada about the residential boarding schools. In our country, there is work being done towards that through the University of Minnesota, I'm pretty sure it is, the Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition, I think. But I think that's a really significant part of the story, to learn to love our neighbors. And so I would encourage learning about that. There may be residential boarding schools that are or were near where you live, and that's an important story to learn in loving our neighbor.
And last, as Jim said, each nation is different. I love Richard Twist's explanation, and I'm going to change it a little bit because of our context. He said Norwegians, I would say Swedes and Japanese. Each nation is that distinct in who we are. So the three things that I came, and as I listened, is academia, and these three are way more academic than me, so I'm not sure why I came up with these, but we did. So the first one is a book by Randy Woodley, who is Cherokee, and it's called Being Rooted. And it just is a great book. It takes you back to the incredible understanding of Unchimaka. Being Rooted, Randy Woodley. The second one, I hope you've read, and because it sets a base, is Mark Charles and Sung Cha Ra's Unsettling Truths. It goes back to the original 300 years ago, where Kingdom of God, Kingdom of Man, which in my perspective, and I think that's where all of this happens. And the last one is, it came out in the beginning of July, and it's by Sarah Augustine, who her nation is unrecognized. And the title of the book is called The Land Is Not Empty, How Doctrine of Discovery is Still Being Currently Used. And one of the things she says in there that I want to leave before we do Q&A is solidarity is not symbolic. And we think about that. We tell somebody we're going to pray for them, and we walk away and don't pray. How much solidarity did we have in that process? So we have 11 minutes, because Alipe is yelling at me already. My phone's been blowing up. We have 11 minutes, but we'd like to give you some time for question and answers. Yes, I'll come back to you. Oh, okay. Perfect.
Yeah, I have heard the four of you and seen you in various covenant things. Do you have a sense of how many other pastors in the covenant would consider themselves part of Native culture, Native American culture, Indigenous?
Yeah, so when I stepped in the role as president of IMA, we had 12 of us on the books. In part by passing repudiation of Doctrine of Discovery, we're at 40. Because people now know this is a safe denomination to be able to be who I am. Do I think there's more? I believe there'll be a lot more. I believe a lot of youngers, our youth, as we continue to live this out, will say, I can fit, just as that church plant did. So literally, in a year and a half I've been in this role, we've gone from 12 to 40. And in part because of repudiation of Doctrine of Discovery, because we were actually working to repute it. Yes. The question, Jim, was are those new people in, or those committing publicly? And the answer is both.
Just could you give us a brief description of how you define Doctrine of Discovery? Because I think that's part of the context, is people want to explain it, but they don't know exactly what to say.
I'm going to give it to the scholars. Jim, did you hear that? Or Curtis?
The Doctrine of Discovery empowered the Europeans to decide for themselves who is Christian and who is not. Because when they enter if they were to enter any kind of country and the kingdom or the Christian kingdom, quote, Christian kingdom did not exist, the land was up for grabs and people were as well as people. And so it was really just kind of stripping indigenous people of being in the image of God, but also allowing explorers, Europeans, those people that held the papal bull, I guess, arrest warrants, the opportunity to decide who is a Christian and who is not. And I want to be really careful because, I mean, you did ask for a very simple answer, and it's a whole lot more complex than that. But in essence, that's, at least for me, that's how I would define it, or that's how I see it very, very simply. But I would encourage you to read about the Doctrine of Discovery, and then also just how it's affected. I mean, it's still affecting, and the Supreme Court is still making decisions based on the Doctrine of Discovery even today. And so, Curtis, I don't know if you want to add anything else to that, or TJ. Did I answer his question? I mean, did I answer your question for you? Okay. What was the question, Curtis? I missed it. Yeah. In addition to what Curtis said, I think one of the major one of the things, obstacles, is that what people have to give up. Because when you start talking about the repudiation of the Doctrine of Discovery, whenever you have conversations that involve indigenous people, especially Native American people, everybody is worried. Where everybody's mind goes is to, oh, we have to give up the land. They want the land back. And so I think that is one of the obstacles, and people taking into consideration, what do they have to give up? And for me, I looked to Zacchaeus. I mean, Zacchaeus had a lot to give up, but when Jesus invited him into being, or calling him to just be a friend in a relationship with him, Zacchaeus was willing to give up everything that he stole from people. And so, I guess I think the heart is there's more to give up than what you can get out of it. And so I think that's the biggest obstacle, is what we have to give up, what people are thinking. But it's having conversations, like Lenore said. Not everybody wants the land back. Not all Native Americans. They've already been displaced. They know what it means to be displaced. And so they're not all about having the place. They don't want to be displaced. They just want to be able to have the freedom to go to where the land, where they can, the sacred lands. I mean, it would be like if, somebody invaded America and says, nobody can go to Arlington Cemetery to honor, family members that have served in the military. And so, you've taken away sacred lands from Indigenous people. And one of the things I think that, and I want to be careful, I don't speak on behalf of all Indigenous people, but I know part of it involves, like for Hawaiians, part of it involves being able to go to the sacred places and do the ceremonies that bring honor to the Creator. So TJ, can I say something really quick? I want to say thank you very much for everybody that's here, because it shows that you have a heart and that you want to learn more. And you know what? There is so much to learn regarding the doctrine of discovery, and it's a journey that we're on together. But I want to offer this up, because Lenore's gone. But but don't tell her I told you guys this. But I want to offer up. I know this is an ongoing conversation with Zoom and everything. If you have a group, if you're part of the anti-racism pathways, or if your church is interested in learning more about the doctrine of discovery, email either myself or Lenore 3 Stars, and we would be more than happy to sit in with your group. And I don't want to offer up Curtis and TJ, but at least Lenore and myself, and maybe all 4 of us, would be willing to sit and even have more conversations. So contact us. We'd love to, set up a Zoom time. And actually, I did check with Lenore. I offered it up during the last session, and in between, I said that was okay, right, Lenore? So I want to offer you that invitation if you're interested in having a further conversation. Lenore and I would be more than happy to Zoom in with you and have that conversation.
And in our villages, whenever there's time to pray and the elder leads a prayer, they always say, let's all stand. So would you stand? And here's what I want us to do. Jesus taught us to pray. And so I want us to pray together that prayer that he taught us to pray. Because in that prayer, we ask God for his kingdom to come and his will to be done. And so let's pray that together, saying, forgive us our sins, okay? So, our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, and thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our sins, as we forgive those who sin against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Hey, thank you for being here.
Thank you guys very much.
I wish we had more time. I have like 1,000 questions I could ask you. Okay, I'm gonna look for you.
I completely remember that, man. That was so long ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Love talking about this stuff. Thank you.
Thanks for being here. It's great to be here.